Hi, welcome. Welcome to the tree pandemics 1904 to 2024. I'm going to talk about the 100-year period in the forest and some of the things that have been happening in the forest in that 100-year time period. This is the third of the fall 2024 garden lecture series. My name is Carol McMullen. I'm a North Fulton Master Gardener, and Master Gardeners are in Georgia are part of the UGA Extension Service. Let me introduce myself. Okay, we had a little glitch here. Okay, let me introduce myself. I'm Carol McMullen, and I've been a Master Gardener for the last 10 years, and I've taught biology for 35 years. I've become a biologist. I think I was born to be a biologist. I always loved being outdoors. And when I came to Georgia, I wanted to become a Master Gardener. And I also wanted to reach out and help some of the students that needed scholarships. So I've been involved with two scholarship programs, and I'm the chairman of both of them. And one of these is associated with Assistance League of Atlanta, the other with PEO Chapter M. Now, we're going to be talking about these tree pandemics, and I want to introduce you to the different types of forests that we find in the eastern US. You will see the green areas. The green areas on this map is basically the area we concentrate on today. Notice up in Maine, we see the green, and it goes the whole way down here to North Georgia and Alabama. This is the Appalachian Forest. The Appalachian Forest has a diversity of hardwood trees and softwood trees. And you'll notice the yellow. If you look out your window, if you've got trees around, you're probably going to notice that they're oaks and pine, because that is the primary trees that are in this location. If you go up to North Georgia, that's the area with the Appalachian forests. You will find that some of the trees I'm going to talk about, we are in the southernmost portion of the range of some of the trees that I'm going to be discussing today. Okay, you notice that I said that I'm going to be discussing from 1904. Let's go back to 1904 and let's just get a view. Let's helicopter in and just kind of get a view of what the forest might have been like in the eastern Appalachian forest. You can see, I picked this picture because a picture's worth 1,000 words. You can see that there are two individuals here that are in the forest, and they're surrounded by these very large trees. If you didn't know that I'm talking about the changing face of the Eastern Appalachian Forest, you would think that this was taken out in California, Washington State, Oregon, that these might be redwoods or sequoia trees. Look how large they are. Notice the size of the people in comparison to the size of the trees. This is just giving you some idea of what the European colonists saw when they came into the forest of the eastern United States. So you can see this picture comes from the Library of Congress, and you can see why they've decided to hold on to this picture. It's a very, very important picture. Now, what are these trees? Yeah, I told you they're not sequoias. I told you they're not redwoods. What are they? And why aren't you seeing them today? These are American chestnuts, and they have been, as of 1950, they were declared to be extinct in the wild. So I'm going to start my presentation and talk about the American chestnut. Now, the American chestnut, you may have heard the song, Christmas song, roasting chestnuts on the open fire. My parents always had chestnuts at Christmas time. And they did talk about the fact that there were these chestnut trees. And I just kind of, put that in the background and just let that, waited maybe decades later to try to figure out what in the heck these chestnuts were all about. You can see the chestnuts. I have some back here. And I need to get my gloves because they are pricklies. All right, I'm going to get a hold of one of these little prickly items back here that I have. This is the seed pod. You can see it here in this picture. And you can see the chestnut that's there also. Okay, you can see if I hold these up in my hand, I don't know if you can see these things, how big they are. They're rather large, and they have lots of stored food in them, obviously. And so they were an excellent source for the animals that lived in the forest at that time. And you can see how well protected they are. That's why I put my glove on, because these are prickly, nasty little seed coats that protected them. And then they will open up and drop the seed, and the seed falls to the ground. And if they're lucky, if the tree's lucky, it's going to have offspring, and they're going to be put into the ground. They're going to be able to root and produce another seedling in another tree. Okay. It's very important that you have a concept of what a chestnut is. Now, the American chestnut tree, you notice that they're large trees. You know, how many were there? Okay, look at all those zeros. There weren't 4,000 or 4 million. There were 4 billion. Let that sink in. 4 billion of these trees until a nasty pandemic happened. Starting in 1904, thanks to global trade, we brought in the chestnut blight. And these diseases that I'm going to talk about are very, very specific, only to one particular plant or one particular tree. So this fungus only attacked the chestnut. And these fungus, they reproduce by spores. And these spores that they reproduce are just these teeny tiny little things affecting this giant. And to give you a little bit of a scope of what 4 billion trees would have been like spread over the entire eastern portion of the United States, they filled about 25% of the ecosystem, the hardwoods that existed in the Appalachian chain. As I mentioned, you saw the size of them, and you know that these provided for many, many birds and mammals, and even human beings collected them. My parents even talked about, they went out and bought them when I was a child, because by the time I was a child, the trees had become extinct in the wild, but they would get chestnuts because there are Chinese chestnuts, and you can still buy chestnuts, but you can't buy chestnuts from the American chestnut tree. So what happened by about 1930, most areas of the Appalachia chain had seen massive die-outs of the chestnut trees. There was a lot of clear cutting that was going on, which destroyed a lot of the chestnuts. And then this pandemic occurred. And so there were the remaining trees that hadn't died yet, and the logging industry said, well, if they're going to die, why don't we just go in and cut the rest of them? So large swaths of the eastern forests were cut. And to really find an old growth forest is almost impossible. There's really virtually very, very few. You could probably count them on your two hands, maybe you may need some toes to discover where these old growth forests are that are virgin forests. There are just very, very few of them left. They had such an insatiable desire to collect wood and use it for, heating their homes, for making ships. It was used to make everything practically was dependent on wood. And so the demise of the forest occurred for several reasons. Now, I always like to have something positive to say. And starting in about the 1980s, people had been festering ideas for a period of time. But finally, by the 1980s, a group of people got together and formed the American Chestnut Society. And this society has been very active for the last 25 years or so. And they are trying to save the American chestnut tree from extinction through a selective breeding program, which I'll explain in more detail. Okay, let's just see where these chestnuts existed. If you've ever heard of the Appalachian Trail, this is pretty much the area that we're talking about, the Appalachian Trail, the Appalachian Mountain Chain. And I was born and raised in Pennsylvania, and you can see the entire state. Oh, my light just burned out. Oh, I don't know. Just one second. I'm going to need some help. Dana, my light went out. I don't know if they can. So anyway, I don't know if you can see this. We're having another technical problem here.
Go ahead.
Should I go ahead? Okay, I'm going to go ahead. So this is the American chestnut habitat. Existed the whole way from Maine. You can see the lighter green where there were fewer of them, and you can see that the state of Pennsylvania was entirely covered with them, West Virginia, parts of Ohio, and so forth, Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Georgia. Okay, and then the other map I thought was really interesting. You can see demise of these trees where they became extinct. And then you can see the very last area where there were a few survivors, and that went into the 1950s, but pretty much by the 1930s, they were gone. Okay, now these trees were so important. If you have any concept of, the size of these chestnuts and the number of them, one tree can produce thousands of these chestnuts. They were considered to be a keystone species. With their demise, you can imagine the whole ecosystem collapsed. Keystone species can be either a plant, such as the chestnut, it can be an animal, like it could be the wolf. And they've reintroduced the wolf, as you know, out west because they have found that that is a keystone species. So you can have a plant or an animal. They provide an important role in the food chain. Once due to habitat destruction, hunting, or disease, and there's a major change in the ecosystem when one of these keystone species dies. And as a result, there is going to be a reverberation throughout the entire ecosystem. There'll be habitats now that are unoccupied, and those habitats are going to be filled by other species. There's going to be a rush by other species in competition for that habitat that has just been voided. It can be either native species, which is the most desirable thing that's going to happen if you lose a keystone species, but it's also an invitation to invasive plants and organisms. As you know, in Georgia, we've got the kudzu, and it's an opportunist that fills a void when a road is being built or a subdivision or something disturbs the earth. That's their opportunity to move in. Okay, keystone species relates to the food chain, so I just want to go over the food chain with you. Notice this one is for the oak tree, and you can see if that oak tree, which is a producer and is obtaining the energy from the sun, if there's a demise of the oak tree, every other organism in here, the primary consumer, the secondary consumer, and the tertiary consumer, this whole ecosystem collapses. And I just can't even imagine if we step back to the 1910, 1920, 1930, just what happened as these trees were dying in the forest, what effect this had on every other plant and animal, insect, small mammals, large mammals, amphibians, reptiles, everything. Large and small were affected by the loss of this very, very important organism. Now, why were chestnut trees so important? They were beautiful, the aesthetic beauty of them. They were the giants of the forest. As I mentioned, they were keystone species, and you're going to hear that again. If I was giving you a test at the end of this, I'd be asking you to tell me if I've taught you correctly and that you can tell me what a keystone species is. These provide food and they provide habitat for insects, birds, invertebrates, vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, the whole ecosystem. They provide shade. Now, you might not even think about this shade. And if you cut down a tree, you think, oh my gosh, I don't have any shade in my yard, and my heating or my cooling bill is going to go up because I don't have any shade left anymore. And it's important for some species, such as trout and other aquatic life, to have that cooler stream. Very, very important. Shade, not all plants desire full sun. Some of them desire shade, and so these trees do provide shade for them. I have a beautiful shade garden in my back where I have lots and lots of trees. They provide for the diversity of plant life. They add to air quality. We want to, get rid of as much carbon dioxide as we possibly can get, removes the carbon dioxide, and then what is another benefit? We get that oxygen that we need. They help to maintain the water quality. Their root system holds back the soil, prevents erosion, filters out pollutants. and other things. It's just, they were very, very important. So if you can just kind of put yourself back in that environment. Now, I'd mentioned the American Chestnut Society, and I have been so fortunate as I did this research that I was able to link up with the American Chestnut Tree Society and go to Berry College where they're doing some of their research. This picture was taken at Berry College, which has the largest campus of any college in the entire United States. And I will tell you, I went to the greenhouse to do the preliminary research, and then they drove us into the chestnut forest. And I swear that it was 5 miles away. We kept driving. So anyway, this is a sign that they have near their forest. The American Chestnut Society, when they started in the 1980s, that whole DNA revolution really hadn't gotten totally underway then. And it was a one-prong approach, and they were breeding the American chestnut to the Chinese chestnut. Now, fortunately, the Chinese chestnut is immune to the fungal disease. And so what they said to do, we're going to take an American chestnut, we're going to take a Chinese chestnut, we're going to mate the two of them, and we're going to have 50% of the genes from the American and 50 from the Chinese. But the American Chestnut Society said, we want the purest American chestnut we could possibly get. So for the last 40 years, science can work very, very slowly. They have continued to crossbreed the American chestnut that has some of the Chinese in it and try to diminish the Chinese genetics and increase the American chestnut genetics. And then we had the DNA revolution. And this then, they could identify specific genes that might give them an immunity. And they have found that wheat has a gene that prevents this fungus from functioning. It's a biochemical reaction that the gene prevents from happening, and then that can be transferred to the American chestnut, and they are ongoing with that research currently. They've had a few setbacks, which I don't have time to get into, but anyway, that is another part of the two-prong approach. Okay, now, just to give you a little bit of an idea how this whole, how we get these chestnuts, you have to know a little bit about the sex life. Okay, we have to have a male and female to have a sex life. Okay, up at the top picture, you can see these little fringy edges. They contain the pollen. And so the pollen is up there. And now it has to get, the sperm has to get, the pollen has a sperm and it has to get to the egg, and the egg is in the flower. So on the bottom left, you can see the flower, and that pollen will be transferred by wind, or up at Berry, they don't want to transfer it by wind. They want to transfer it to a specific plant. And so they're going to cover up the males and collect the pollen and make sure that they go to the specific trees that they want to have them pollinate. And then once the egg and sperm have joined, the embryo starts to form. And after a few months' time, you will end up with this prickly looking thing on the exterior, and that is the seed pod, and in there is a single seed. And so I really have to put my gloves on because these are nasty prickles. So here you can see one. Okay, and in there is one chestnut seed. Okay, let's move on. Let's learn a little bit more about how this research is being conducted. Okay, here you can see they have a bag over the male flower to collect the pollen. And there you can see a leaf. And a friend of mine actually has a chestnut tree here in Milton, Georgia. I don't know why it survived. It's probably over 100 years old. It did not succumb to the blight. There's very, very few of them. He's got a treasure down there. So yes, today I just cut this little portion of the limb off so that you could see the leaves. Okay, moving on. All right, now I want you to be the diagnostician here. Here is this tree that is in the forest at Berry. It has been crossed with the Chinese chestnut, and I want you to look at it and tell me if it's healthy or diseased. I think you can very quickly surmise that it is diseased. So what is going on here? That fungus gets in there, and there is these little fungus spores. They're bad news. And the wind brings them in. And these little microscopic pieces of bad news get in there, and then they start to grow, and they get these tentacle-like things called hyphae, and the tentacles will form, and they keep getting more and more and more and more of them. As they get more and more of them, it's putting stress on the bark, and it just explodes, and it creates these things called cankers. And you can see that this tree is not long for the world. It is definitely very, very diseased and is about to be cut down. It may no longer even be there. But I wanted to capture this picture so that you could do your own diagnosis. Now, let's go back to Berry College, to the greenhouse that I told you about. And what they're doing, they have planted the chestnut seeds of these hybrids that are partially Chinese chestnuts and partially American chestnuts. They're about 3 months old. These really, really grow fast. Now, what did we do? I helped to do this research. This is the fungus over here on the left side, and it's growing on what's called a petri dish. And it's growing in something called auger. And the most actively growing portion is over here at the very, very edge. And you can see a bunch of little circles all around the perimeter of the fungus. And you can see little, looks like gel capsules from a pill that we took them apart. We took the blunt end and we dug into the auger and got some of the fungus. And then we transferred the fungus to these nice, healthy looking, poor little trees. And we're asking them to be immune. We're looking for the most resistant, fungus-resistant ones. And so we took these little capsules with the fungus on, and we put them up on the very tippy top. I don't know if you can see the little black tippy top of that one, where we added those. So they're being inoculated with the fungus to determine resistance. And they're going to take the most resistant ones and take them 5 miles down the road and put them in the forest. Now, if you're interested in helping get a form of American chestnut that can be reintroduced into the ecosystem, I would highly suggest that you take a screenshot of this. The cost of this is about $40. I think that, yeah, $40. And the information that you need to become a member is recorded there. And I want to tell you, if you see a slide that you like, please take a screenshot. And also, I forgot to tell you, please use the Q&A button to ask questions if you have any questions, because I can't take questions right now, but I will at the end. If this is being recorded, and so it will be available on Facebook and YouTube, the YouTube channel, North Fulton Master Garden YouTube channel. And you as registrants will receive a follow-up email in a few days. So this will be available to you. Okay, now, once this very, very important keystone species was extinct in the wild, what plant took over that niche? Something that had the ability to produce a large quantity of food to nourish the many, many insects and birds and mammals that depended upon it directly or indirectly. So what tree became the keystone species after the extinction of the American chestnut? All right, I think you can figure it out. Look at that. I think you all can identify those as acorns, and so the oak tree has taken over. And there are many types of oak trees, and I just want to give you a brief introduction to oak trees. There's the white oak tree that's on the left and the red on the right. You can see the rounded edges on the white, and then the very deeply grooved and pointed edges on the red oaks. And they both produce acorns, and they're pretty difficult to actually figure out if you've got a white or a red based on the acorns, because they look so similar. Okay, here are some of them. I think I'll tell you in a minute how many are in Georgia and how many are in the United States, but I'm just going to look at the top row here. The pin oak, I have several pin oaks. I think the developers bought a lot of those pin oaks. There are a tremendous number of pin oaks in this northern at the northern Fulton County community of Milton, where I live. There's also the southern red oak and the northern red oak. And you can see they have the pointed leaves to them. Those are all, if you are listening back, these are all types of red. And then you've got the white oak. And we have a little glitch again. I'm going to have to let my expert come in here and explain to me how to do this. Dana? Okay. The light went out. So should I continue to talk? I'm sorry. All right, we had another little glitch here. So the top ones are the red oaks, and the bottom are the white oaks. And you can see the chestnut oak. The chestnut oak is a very large leafed oak tree, and it has a very large acorn. And I'll tell you, because it has such a nice big acorn, that they get eaten very, very fast. It's even hard to find them on the ground. Why are oaks so important? Well, you've seen this slide before. I just captured the same slide that I used for the chestnut. Again, they're a keystone species. They're aesthetically beautiful. They provide shade in your garden, shade if they're by a stream, to help the aquatic life that likes a cooler water environment. Shade for shade plants, and we can contributes to the air quality and so forth, and prevents erosion. Everything that we've already mentioned for the chestnut. And so they were a very good species to take over the chestnut's habitat. How did they reproduce? Well, very similar to the way that the chestnuts reproduce. You can see they have male flowers and female flowers. And the female flower is going, okay, so we've got the male flower over here on the right side. And that, if you go out in the spring, you'll see them littering all over. If you've got an oak tree, you can see them on the ground, but you don't see the female flower because that stays there. The pollen then pollinates the female flower, and that turns into the acorn, which drops in the fall. Okay, here are your life-sustaining acorns. There are about 70 species of oaks in the United States, 28 of which live in Georgia. And I have been lucky enough to probably find maybe 10, 15 of these different types of oaks that I can identify. And there are many of them, obviously, many more that I cannot. Okay, these acorns, I've looked this up. Evidently, there's 96 species of U.S. birds and mammals that depend on acorns for their source of food, directly or indirectly. And the oak trees are very population, around 950 of the caterpillars associated with the reproductive system and the life cycle of moths and butterflies. Now, moving on, let's change from talking about chestnuts and oaks. Let's look at this. Now, if you look over here on the right side, you can tell that those are not acorns. They're not chestnuts. It's another tree. If you look at it, you can probably identify that it's some type of evergreen. Okay, this is a very important species in the Appalachian forest. And I love this picture. I took this, well, I guess I took some pictures this year, but they weren't as good as these. So I went online and got these. But I want you to kind of transfer yourself, just take yourself into the woods, because we're talking about the forest. See if you can just transport yourself into the forest. You can see over here, this forest is filled with very large trees. And I wanted to make a point. I have never been in an old growth forest until this summer. And I made a point of looking up when I was in Pennsylvania. We rented a farmhouse in Somerset, Pennsylvania, which has 5 state parks. And one of the state parks actually had an old growth forest. And these actually are old growth hemlocks. They have been here since the Revolutionary War, or maybe even before the Revolutionary War. I can see the people that are walking along this path. This was almost a spiritual experience, walking in this woods with these large trees that have experienced all this history. And then over on the right side, you can see a stream, and this particular path followed a stream. So if you can just kind of helicopter yourself into this beautiful environment. This particular state park is called Laurel Hill State Park. Now, Why have I discussed the hemlocks of the many different trees that exist in our environment? Well, a few years ago, this ugly looking insect, you're ugly and you're nasty and you do bad things. Okay, what bad thing does it do? Okay, it goes into hemlocks. Again, it's very, very specific, only to hemlocks. And it likes to suck the juice out of the hemlock. This is called a woolly adelgid. And that only will cause, damage to a hemlock. Now, this was taken by a group in Connecticut. This is the demise. These trees are very, very old. This was taken by the newspaper in Michigan. This is a hemlock forest, and you can see that some of them have died and succumbed to the disease, and some have not. These trees were decades, if not centuries, old, and they were destroyed by that ugly creature called the woolly adelgid. Now, when I was in Pennsylvania, that beautiful path that I was on, these trees were very healthy. They didn't show any sign, as far as I knew, of the woolly adelgid. But we went on another walk about 20 miles away, also in Somerset County, that is part of the Somerset Conservation Society, and it's called the Cumberland, or the Kimberly Run, excuse me, Kimberly Run. And Kimberly Run also has hemlocks, and these hemlocks, unfortunately, have many of the trees have lost their lower limbs, but the upper limbs are looking good, and they are using insecticides to try to combat these woolly adelgids. Again, the slide looks the same. Why were hemlocks so important portions of the Appalachian forest? These were the dominant trees, the keystone species, and for all the following reasons that we've just discussed in the past, these were important. They still are important. Hemlocks, this portion of Georgia is the North Fulton area, is about as far south as these hemlocks were growing in their native environment. Now let's go back and look at this ugly thing, unless this is going to be the last time we're going to look at the ugly woolly adelgid. Okay, so we're going from ugly to attractive. There's a very attractive looking insect, looks like a scarab. Okay, it is called an elm tree insect. Okay, and this particular elm ash borer. Okay, there we go. It's an elm ash borer. This elm ash borer, you can see, looks pretty, but it is a wicked little thing. And let's look at what it actually does. This is the life cycle. When this emerald ash borer lays its eggs, it lays its eggs on the outside of a tree. Those eggs then hatch and they form a larva. The larva then has the ability to crawl into the interior of the tree. And if you look at the yellow portion of the interior of the tree, that's the xylem that carries water from the roots of the stems to the leaves. And it goes in there and it creates these tunnels, and it interrupts the passage of water from the roots to the stems to the leaves when it does that. And if there's enough of these tunnels that go through this tree, it will cause the death of the tree. Now, if we look over here on the left, you can see an ash tree that looks healthy. There's the ash leaves. And here you can see, if you look really closely, you can see here these tunnels that have been created by the emerald ash borer as it's gone through. And as it's gone through there, in order to, as it eats, it just eats its way through there and consumes that xylem. It helps to separate the bark from the interior of the trunk of the tree. And this starts to peel away. And then that's where the phloem is, and the phloem carries the food from the leaves to the trunk to the roots. And so the whole vascular system, similar to our arteries and veins, the whole system of xylem and phloem, the whole vascular tissue just collapses as a result. Now, I can give you a personal story about this. This emerald ash borer, I guess, was first seen out in the West in Oregon. In Oregon, there are a number of tree farms out there, and many of the nurseries in the East depend upon the Oregon nurseries to provide them with trees. And my niece owns a large tree nursery outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And every year they sell a certain number of ash trees. And so when they're ordering trees in the spring, they'll say, you know, we need X number of ash trees. And they take these young ash trees, they put them on their property, their farm that they have outside of Pittsburgh, and they grow these trees. And about 10 years ago, the alert went out that this emerald ash borer came in from the Orient somewhere, from Asia somewhere, and that in order to prevent this spread of this throughout the United States, she had to destroy all of her ash trees. Not only the new ones that she got, but all the ash trees had to be destroyed. That was a pretty, difficult decision to be made, but the state decided that that was the very best decision to keep this particular insect from devastating the ash population. Now, going from insects, those ugly insects, the pretty insects, the bad news insects, let's take a look at some pretty flowers. And I think you can identify what these are. These happen to be dogwood. This is a dogwood tree. And, since I'm talking about pandemics, I'm going to talk about what's going on with the dogwood. We have the Dogwood Festival, and I love to go down 400 in the spring. There's just loaded with dogwoods, and my neighborhood has dogwoods. I have dogwoods back in my forest. They're pretty healthy. So what's going on here? Okay, it's called anthracnose disease. It was first detected in 1978 in Connecticut and New York. In a short period of time, these spores, these little packages of bad news, were able to be spread by the wind. They were spread the whole way from New England down to North Georgia in a matter of 9 years. So it just spread gradually. What happens is that this fungus usually will begin on the leaves, and you can be alert to the changes that occurred by looking at the leaves, which I'll show you in a minute. And trees that are in a moist, shady location are at your highest risk. And I just planted a dogwood tree last year, and it's in a partially sunny environment, and it's very well mulched. So what can you do? Okay, if you see this, it looks like it's wilting. It looks like it's, not only wilting, it looks like somebody has not watered this thing in a long time. Well, that is not from lack of water. That's due to this fungus. What you can do is cut this away. Cut that away. You can use a fungicide if you detect it. Normally, we don't tell you to do that, but in this case, I would highly suggest it. And when you water it at the soil. Don't water the leaves. And mulching is very, very important to keeping this disease at bay. Now, we've talked about fungal diseases. We've talked about insect diseases. And then maybe, what am I doing here? This looks like, hieroglyphics or pictographs. This looks like, something that I took a picture of out west or something. But no, these are caused by insects. And probably if there's any insect that that has destroyed anything on your property or any adjacent property, this is the pine beetle. The pine beetle does something very similar to that of the ash borer. It will tunnel in, it'll go underneath the bark, tunnel in, and start to make these tunnels. And so if you see a tree that's dead or, on its way out and you see this, it's probably the pine beetle. This is very, very common. I've lost many trees in my woods. Now, there are different kind of pine bark beetles. The one that I seem to have are these black turpentine ones. They're the larger ones. I haven't really even seen them, but I've seen the results of their tunneling and what happens. And the reason I think that's what I have rather than some of these for the ones that are smaller that they all affect different levels of the pine tree. What happens with my trees that they start to show signs of major decay at the base of the tree, very close to the soil, and then they just fall over, root system and all, and they just fall right over. Now, when they are being attacked by these pine beetles, they have, like just like we have an immune system when we send out antibodies and so forth, they send out their resin. And this is a tree that's been attacked. Obviously, this tree has been attacked by numerous of these beetles, and they've tried to protect themselves with this resin. And these entry points are called pitch tubes. And here's another pitch tube. This is in my own backyard. Look at the devastation. It's just amazing. I cut down probably 10 trees this past spring. And of course, I wanted to get them out of the environment. So I hired somebody to remove them. And I said, do you have a grinder? Great. Don't just take them somewhere. Please grind them up. So they ground them up for me. And here's more destruction in my backyard. Okay, so that's the pine beetle, and I hope that your pines are happy and healthy. I've got some happy and healthy ones, and I have some very unhappy and unhealthy ones. Now, I'm going to finish up my presentation by talking about something that's very personal to me. That's the American elm tree. We had I grew up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and we had a small lot, but we had an American elm tree in the front. When we sold the house in 1966, that tree was very healthy. Obviously, if I'm talking about pandemics, I have to tell you that it's no longer there. So it must have succumbed to this disease. And my question is, why are one of America's favorite treescape trees becoming a rarity? At one time, there were 30,000 elm streets in the United States. These were favorite treescape trees. They are also very important growing by streams. They keep the streams cool, keep the temperature down, and are very important to the aquatic life and the fish life that exists in the streams. And so this is the picture that's over here on the left is of New York. This is Central Park, and there's the leaves. Now, what's going on here? Okay, I mentioned Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street has been occurring, and this is called the Dutch elm disease. It's caused by a fungal disease that's very specific to elms. As I mentioned, it's an important tree that likes to grow along streams. It's a floodplain tree that helps prevent flooding. It was first identified in 1921 in the Netherlands, and that's why it's called the Dutch elm disease. And the major decline started to occur in the 1970s. The beetle bores underneath the bark, and then that beetle carries with it the spores. It is a fungal disease. And again, it's very similar to the sequence of things that happens in the ash borer. It affects the xylem, and the disease cycle begins. It's one of the vascular wilt diseases. The spores germinate in the xylem and prevents the transport of water. Now, is there a happy ending to this whole thing? Okay, so here's just a picture of the leaf anatomy, the xylem that carries the water, the phloem that carries the food. Xylem goes from roots to stems to leaves. Phloem provides, the food that photosynthesis occurs in the leaf, and that brings the food from the leaves to the stems, to the trunks, to the roots. And that is majorly affected by this fungus. And there's the seed pods and the flowers. Now, this is one of my last slides. In fact, I think it is the last slide. And this is Westmont, Pennsylvania. This is where I grew up, a little community of 6,000 people. And they have put their dollars and cents behind their will to save these trees. They have the largest continuous tree-lined streets of American elm trees in the entire United States. I want to introduce you to one of the most beautiful streets in America. This is Luzerne Street. And you can see the beautiful canopy of these elm trees. The borough asks people who live on this street to go up on their second floor in the spring and examine what's going on at the top of the tree to see if there's any damage. Some of these trees have died, and they have replaced them. And so that is my story. And I want to use this quote to kind of end things. We are all interconnected, people, animal, and our environment. When nature suffers, we suffer. When nature flourishes, we all flourish. And if we go back to, oh, here we go. I thought it was back there. I thought I skipped a slide. Okay, the American elm tree, there is a hope for recovery. There is some insecticide fungal preparations, and that's what's keeping the trees in Westmont alive. And also some of the elm trees that are currently being planted are examples of trees that they have crossbred, selective breeding, and they've created the Cathedral and the Triumph. And here are some people that have volunteered to plant some of these hybrid trees that are resistant to the fungal disease. And here, leaving on a positive note, I love my forest. I have enjoyed so much being able to walk in the forest. They are a treasure. We have to work to create the diversity and healthy forests that we want to create. We have to be behind these endeavors to keep these trees alive and healthy and to keep our ecosystem healthy. And put on your hiking boots and start exploring the Georgia beautiful forests. And here over on the very right, I think, is a hemlock tree. And there are some hikers. And you would think that this was taken up in New England, but I actually found this online, and supposedly this is a picture that was taken here in Georgia, probably in North Georgia somewhere, where there's a lot of maples. And here's some references. I'm not going to spend any time on the references, but there they are. If you want to do a screenshot on that, please go right ahead. And questions. All right. It looks like we have a few questions here.
Yes, Carol, so one question came in. There are many chestnut trees in Europe and they bloom in May. Is this a different variety?
It's probably the Chinese chestnut. Yes, because the Chinese chestnut is resistant, and that's the one that they've been doing the selective breeding with. That's the American Chestnut Society has been very, very active in trying to produce the most authentic American chestnut by just capturing some of the very important disease-resistant DNA from the Chinese chestnut and in maintaining most of the features of the American chestnut. The chestnuts evidently are bigger, the American chestnut, and it's a larger tree, and it was a native here, and that's what we want to, when we do have them in large quantities in the next probably 10 years, I'm sure they're going to start introducing them to the forest. There is one place in Florida where they have introduced some of the hybrids.
Okay, also another question regarding the chestnuts. So one of our participants asks, was any of this part of the Darling 58 program?
Okay, well, I didn't want to get into all the details as a biology teacher, and the Darling are part of the, not the selective breeding, but this is the DNA study. They have captured a gene from wheat that makes the American chestnut immune to the American chestnut disease. The only problem is they did take the gene and they created what they call the Darling 58 chestnut. And just last year, a year ago, they found out that the gene is being turned on constantly. And in normal situations, a gene is turned on at certain points in time, and then it's turned off, and then it's turned back on again. And this gene is continually being turned on, and as a result, the chestnut trees were dying. So they're back to the genetic engineering again and trying to figure out how they can get this gene into the American chestnut and have the promoter gene turn it on and off, not a constant on button.
Okay. Another question regarding the chestnut. Is the fungus put into the capsule?
Yes, yes, we transferred the fungus to the capsule, and the capsule is put on the growing tips of the 3-month-old chestnuts. And then the ones that didn't show any signs of the disease that seems to have some resistance, those are the ones that are then taken to the forest and buried and planted.
Um,
The
what can you
search
speak?
for the perfect tree.
Yeah. Can you speak about your knowledge so far about the pandemic of the spotted lanternfly that's coming down from Pennsylvania?
That I cannot tell you. I know there was an article in the newspaper that our extension agent just wrote. So if you get the Appa newspaper chain, there is an article in there, and I wish that I'd had time this weekend to read it because I am not familiar with it. But that's what I would highly suggest. And we do have a website, and you can get past newspaper articles. We've written, I forget, over 50 of them, 50 different newspaper articles on various topics related to plants, animals in this part of Georgia.
You know what we can do at the when we do the follow up to the registrants, we can put a link in there to to refer to that article. I do know, as I did read it, that and then coming from New Jersey myself, and having family in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, these things came from Asia and they're fast moving and they're moving even on vehicles. So that's why we're now on the lookout. They've already found them in North Carolina. So it's just a matter of time. And so you'll need to definitely read that article to make sure that you can see the signs of what they look like in their various stages of life. The spotted lanternfly, especially their nymphs. So there's that and we'll send that as a link in our follow-up. Another comment is, I think the sampling of the 58 were somewhat haphazard. Is that true?
Well, they had a Darling 54 and a Darling 58, and they had pollen, which they thought was from the Darling 58, that they were going to pollinate these trees with. And they actually pollinated it with the 54 instead of the 58. And about 100% of the 54s that they thought were 58s died. It's pretty complex. I could spend about a half an hour explaining all the details of it. But that happened. They just discovered that the Darling 58s were not 58s, they were 54s. And they also, as I told you, had this problem with the gene that they wanted to transfer being on all the time.
All right. What type of fungicide would you recommend for the trees?
I would definitely go to your neighborhood nursery, whether it's Pikes or even go to, there are people at Pikes or Scottdale Farm or some of the other nurseries, and ask them specifically what kind of fungus to use on particular, like for instance, what's the best one to use for dogwood? What's the best one to use for elm if you have an elm tree? So that I really don't know too much about the chemicals. So I would defer that to the experts.
Yeah, including your county extension agents.
Yes. Oh, yeah. That would definitely be another very good source.
Oh, and by the way, yes, somebody commented, and I forgot to mention this. The spotted lanternfly's host tree is tree of what I call tree of hell, tree of heaven, Allianthus. So if you have those on your property, you definitely want to get rid of those. And you're going to have to use a cut and paint way of treating it.
Yes, I wish I'd had time to read that article.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? I think I've addressed almost all of them here that we have. I'm going to scroll through. Any other last questions from anybody? All right, Carol, you can continue.
Okay, so if you're interested in the Darling 5458, you can go to the American Chestnut Society. They have some of their Zoom presentations available to the public. And that's how I found out about the 54 and the 58 and the problem with the pollinating and the promoter gene.
You can
Okay.
scroll through the next couple slides.
Okay, so if you want to know more about the North Fulton Master Gardener, you can go to any of these social media. You can go to our website. We have an email address. We have the link tree. We have Facebook. We're on Twitter, on all of these social platforms. Instagram. We have our own web page, and we also have our own YouTube channel. So if you want to do a screenshot of that, you can do that. And you also are going to be receiving a link as a follow-up in a few days. And last but not least, how can you support us? We have various gardens that we maintain. Some of them are in historic places, and we try to. We also have a scholarship program, and if you would like to provide us with some money, you can shop on Amazon Smile and donate to North Fulton Master Gardeners. You can also do PayPal, Giving Fund, also a Facebook fundraiser, or you can just mail us a check. There's different ways to do that, and you can do a screenshot of that. And I believe that is it for today. And thank you so very much for joining us today. I'm sorry we had a few glitches. I hope you learned a lot. And I'll tell you, I learned a lot in putting this together.